Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kat. She is Julie Rappaport, PAC certified couples counselor, and we are doing our weekly series here. And I think this is episode 773. And we're talking about sex. Finally. So we're all
Juicy.
right? Yeah. So when in picking the title, you wanted to call it the junk drawer. So explain that, please.
Uh, well, it's sex is something where there's so much that people don't talk about that things just kind of, um, it's like anything else, like money or mess or like things get played out around sex. And so it's like things that aren't being said, talked about, issues, a lot of avoidance happens. And so it just gets put into the junk drawer. And so that's why.
Okay. We should probably start by just defining what we're talking about. So, is sex is sex just intercourse? Or are we talking about intimacy? And it feels like it could be this giant topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, when I'm sitting in front of clients and talking about sex, I'm definitely asking them what sex is to them because each person as well as each pair has a different definition. Some people think it's just intercourse. Some people think it's anything that leads to orgasm. Some people think it's deep kissing. Some people think it's um, you know anal sex. So it's just like
Mhm.
um, and I think defining the difference for people also of love making versus sex. Um, I think that's two different things as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's start there. So lovemaking versus sex, are, are they two different things, and should they be defined as two different things within a relationship?
Um, I mean, I think, I you know, it it's a hard thing to really define, in the sense of they can be synonymous. They and each person's experience is different, but lovemaking tends to be less about the act itself, the physical act itself, and more about being connected, being present with one another, being in real time, being able to communicate, being able to adjust, give feedback, receive feedback, and be giving and receiving pleasure, um, whether uh, whether it's with genitalia or not, and just like having pleasure be the expression of, giving or receiving pleasure as the expression of the love that the two people feel for one another, versus maybe sex. A lot of times I I hear that sex is, pretty much intercourse and
Physical, yeah,
yeah, and with
transactional.
orgasm,
Mhm.
which is fine. It's, that's great. It's really releases tension and allows for maybe more closeness and um, but it's a different ball game. A lot of times I'll do exercises with couples in session, PG only,
Mhm.
but that where I'm having them touch and give feedback in a way in present time and in the present moment where they're staying really connected um, and giving and receiving, and they I then let them know, hey, that was you were making love, and it was, of course it was PG. There was, you're
Sure.
not going to do that in my office, but
Mm.
but that's a form of making love, and it feels really good to two people, regardless of the genitalia being exposed or not.
Mhm. How important is sex in a relationship to create bonds and connections?
It's I mean, there are all sorts of like chemicals that get released. So like oxytocin is one, and the love chemical, the love hormone. But so that can help create a closeness, and um, but it also depends. A lot of people will say like, oh, sexless marriage,
Mhm.
it really depends. There are plenty of couples that have sexless marriages, and as long as they are okay with it, then no harm, no foul. It's not for anyone else to judge. It's their relationship. It's when one or both parties are not okay with it, then it's a problem.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess sexless marriage with plenty of connection and intimacy is still could still be successful, in
yes.
in terms of what we would deem successful. But I think more often than not, you hear of sexless marriages where one or both are not happy for whatever reason, and sometimes that's the no sex is a symptom of those problems, or sometimes the no sex is causing those problems. And
Yeah.
that brings up an interesting point. I think we talked about this last week as we were sort of prepping for this week, um, where we talk about the difference between men and women, generally speaking, right? Between men and women, where women, and I'm going to probably get it wrong, but it's one of them uses sex to get a connection, and the other one makes a connection by having sex. Or
Yeah, and I mean, we're kind of talking heteronormative here.
sure,
So like this happens really in any, same sex couples um as well, and all iterations of couples, where there could be one person that and in a heterosexual couple, it is more often in our society that women are using are needing connection,
that's
um,
yeah,
in order to then feel like they want to have sex,
okay,
and men typically are needing sex in order to feel connected. And um so typically in literature, it's been kind of, and in the psychological field, I think it typically has been thought that, oh, let's connect the couple first, uh, like intimacy wise, have some closeness and connection, and that will then lead to sex. Um, However, recent research has shown that it's actually quite the opposite. That's not necessarily true. That having sex can then, it like oftentimes, even if you're feeling close, the sex doesn't happen. And so if the sex happens, then it could create the closeness, which then it becomes this kind of figure eight where it's, you know, one kind of feeds into the other. But research has recently shown that actually it's you just got to do the deed, and the connection comes.
interesting, interesting. Okay, so go ahead. You want to
Oh
say more?
yeah, I was just going to say that kind of then leads into avoidance, because couples, when it comes to sex, like there's a lot of avoidance that can happen, um, because there's shame and guilt and all sorts of messages that we've gotten from our childhood about sex,
Hmm.
that's wrapped up in it. And so then if it's uncomfortable, if it's awkward, if we also there's this other part of it, near senses, of sometimes we don't like our partner's breath, or we don't like their BO, we don't like how they smell in general or taste. And people don't talk about that
Right.
because it's awkward or uncomfortable. And then this is the junk drawer that it just gets thrown into there, and then avoidance happens. And when you avoid, avoidance is the purpose of that is to try to lessen anxiety,
Mhm.
and it kind of does in the moment, but then it makes something that was once small very, very big, and it just keeps growing. The more and more you avoid, the bigger it gets. And so I just would encourage couples to stay, kind of find a time where they can connect in private, and be able to just have really kind, honest conversations about maybe what they like or what they don't like, um, what they would prefer. Hey, I love being with you, and do you mind using mouthwash before you come to bed, or taking a shower, uh, you know, whatever it is, because it might be uncomfortable in the moment, but it really, there's some good things that can come out of just that communication. And maybe your partner has a similar issue with you,
Right.
so it just opens the door to a richer experience. And also, your partner is in close contact with you, they can identify possible infections, or things that you might need to go see a doctor for. So, it could be a very helpful thing to just be talking about.
I like that. Um, okay. So I've collected some questions over the course of the week.
Oh, great.
And if you guys in the chat have questions, please chime in. But we'll just sort of go through some of these and hopefully it'll spur some conversation and some comments. Okay.
Great.
So my first one is your partner is really into X, you name it, something maybe on the kinky side or, something that's maybe not in the norm. You, on the other hand, are vehemently opposed to it. This is in a sexual way. Is there a way to compromise? The woman doesn't want to disappoint her man, but isn't very comfortable doing what he really wants her to do. And this is just a specific example that I received.
Um, so the one thing that happens is that, if we're just taking the man, so the man wants something that she's vehemently opposed to. Um, it's one thing that if he wants her to do, to kind of experiment or whatever, but the thing that often happens is, like in this instance, the guy would be, does he really want her to just do the thing, or does he want her to want to do the thing?
Mm.
Right.
I like
So
that. Okay.
so then it kind of goes into emotion around it,
Mhm.
right? It's like, okay, let's just say it's anal sex.
Okay.
Um, and and she's like, all right, then he's upset because he wants her to actually be like, yeah, let's do that. That sounds fun.
Mhm.
We're stoked about that, and so that's one thing to consider. And the other part is that if we do things that we're really vehemently opposed to, then it can create more like disgust for our partner.
Mm.
We kind of then can, we might need to dissociate in order to do those things. It can create more problems. And
Mhm.
so you have to figure out a way of like, what could we do that, he like that particular scratch might not be itched, but what could we do that both of us would get pleasure out of and we're both okay with?
Okay. Yeah, I like that. You mentioned disassociated. Can we dig into that a little bit? Because that's intriguing to me. If you're doing something, where you have to disassociate, what do you mean by that? I think I know, but
Yeah, it's like you're not in your body.
Mhm.
You are elsewhere in order to just kind of get through it. A lot of times, rape victims.
I was gonna say that sounds very, traumatic,
It
almost.
is. It's a trauma response. And so, but sometimes, if one puts themselves in a position of doing something that they don't really want to do just for the sake of, either not disappointing or not, fear of abandonment, um, there will be huge repercussions in the end, right? Like that, like if that continues to happen over and over and over again, eventually the person will um either, I mean, there's no connection, right? Because the person
Mm,
isn't there. Um, but also will begin to um, say, I don't, a lot of times what happens is, the person will say, well, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want, like, it feels icky to me.
mhm,
I want to have sex. I want to actually be present when I have sex. And so then they're just they're not able to do those things without dissociating, so it takes a lot of work. So it would just be good to uh, so if you notice your partner is dissociating, you need to kind of stop the press
mm,
and again, this is present moment awareness. This isn't just getting the act done. If it is, then you're basically auto regulating,
right.
meaning you're just using your partner to masturbate. Um,
Mm,
and that happens a lot, but if you can be in present time and if you're connected and really in the moment, you will notice when somebody isn't present with you, and you just stop and hey, um, can you come back to me, or where'd you go, or I can't feel you, or that you deal with that first before you just continue on.
mhm,
And maybe it doesn't lead to orgasm. Maybe it just stops because something more intimate comes up, something more vulnerable, something that needs to be talked about and shared and processed. And again, that could be just the making love that happens rather than the sex and the orgasm.
right. Okay. The other thing about this one is, and it was based on some conversations back and forth about this question, um, there seems to be a difference too between when I said your partner's really into this and you're not. Um, there's a difference I would think between like a need and a nice to have,
Yes.
right? And so being clear perhaps about that, like, is this something that you need? Right? Or is it just a nice to have? And it sounds like a nice to have would be a little bit easier to compromise on, than where someone says, I absolutely need this to be able to, be fulfilled.
Hmm. Well, then, I mean, if that's the case and somebody is, like you said, vehemently opposed to it,
Yeah,
then you're in deal breaker territory.
sure.
And you have to then, as
Yeah.
as the therapist, that's where you go.
Yeah. And how important is it to sort of have these conversations, these needs and nice to haves, before you start having sex with someone or before, you get into a committed relationship? Because a lot of times people are having sex really quickly, before they even get to know each other well enough to even know what somebody likes or doesn't like. And
Yep.
so how do you kind of reverse that and back up and say, wait a
Well,
minute.
it's a hard thing because um that it goes into the beginning of a relationship. The beginning of the relationship, there's all sorts of drugs from from our hormones that are circulating, that
Mhm.
is just driving us. And that's why the sex is usually so good and desired. Um and there's no there's things that happen in that time. We're kind of not in our right mind. I mean, you think about when you're first dating somebody, oftentimes it's like, oh my God, you know, haven't slept for days and we just stayed up all night, and and then you go to work, and and you're totally fine with that.
Mhm.
That's not real life. That's not, it's just, that's the drugs that we're on. And so we're not in our right mind really. And then eventually we automate to the other person. And
What does that mean?
uh, we we fill in, the brain takes a lot of shortcuts. We like to make things as simple as possible, because if we don't, we're using up a lot of resources. And so the brain takes shortcuts and fills in. And so once we kind of think we know somebody, we just fill in with our brain of like what's going to happen, what they're going to do, what they're not going to do, what they like, what they, all of that. And it takes us out of present moment. And it makes all sorts of errors. And we begin to get more real, I guess. There's times when we have all those chemicals and drugs in our system at the beginning, we might be more experimental. We might be more open to more taboo things. We more, like it might just be because those drugs are at play and we're just like, yeah, this is great. And then as we settle in and automate, and the attachment system is more at play, um, we might be like, oh my God, no, I don't ever want to do
Mm.
that or this, or, and so then what happens is people start um, to compare. They go back of like, oh, hey, we used to do this and this and this. You used to like this and now you don't. And so it's a hard thing when you are starting off, because it's kind of two different ball games of the beginning of a relationship versus when you've been in one for a while.
Mhm.
And with lots of things, this happens where people kind of shift and change, and are different from at the beginning, but especially with sex. And so I guess my best advice would be, as hard as it might be, to not jump into bed with people right away, because of those hormones, like, are kind of, it's exciting and it's tantalizing and it's fun, would be to, hey, let's talk about things before we become physical, because maybe you're not compatible in that way.
Mhm.
And also, this sounds cynical, but it's true, like, people lie. People
Sure.
lie. And they're not necessarily just overtly lying. They're kind of, it's kind of like they're they're trying to believe they're something that in reality they're not. Right. So, oh yeah, I'd be open to that. And then when the reality hits, they're like, mm-mm.
Yeah, and they're doing that just because, like, they really like the other person and they wanna be accepted and, yeah, that makes total sense.
And maybe in their own mind, they're like, yeah, I'm open-minded. Like, yeah, I could do that. But then when it really comes down to it, they're like, that doesn't appeal to me at all.
Yeah, maybe not. Okay. Good, I like that. So Judy has a question. Do you find couples who have communication problems regarding sex also have trouble communicating in other aspects of their life, money, parenting, etc.?
Um, yes and no. It's not necessarily direct correlation, but what I would say is, um, that whatever communication problems they're having, it will get played out in the different areas. So, like, if there's shame involved with talking about sex, then there's going to be shame involved in talking about money or talking about, you know, parenting, or there's just, it's like this, there's, or if they have trouble collaborating with sex, there'll be the same theme in these other areas. So it's kind of like sex, money, time, mess, and kids. Those are kind of the five big
Mm,
topics.
yeah.
You kind of are, like, as a therapist, you're kind of use, like, any of those come into your office and you can use, you use that as the jumping off point for the actual issue. right? Like it's not necessarily, I mean, it can be about time spent or
Sure.
time apart, but it really is, there's an underlying issue that has to be addressed that then would resolve the time issue as well as other issues rather than playing whack-a-mole,
Mhm.
just resolving it in one area and then
Yeah.
it would come up in another.
I do feel like too, if somebody has, a specific, you know, issue or post or past trauma that's related to sex, their communication may be off with regard to sex, but it could be on point with other things
Sure.
potentially, right? Sex could just be one of those, and the same could be the case with money or other things. If you had some traumatic experience with, money, that maybe money is just not the place where you're going to be able to communicate well, and then, sex is not a problem, or vice versa.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, trauma is a whole different
Yeah.
ball game, right? It's we're not necessarily diving into that piece because that that's like that'll throw a wrench into everything.
Right, right, right. Okay. All right, let's move on because I have a bunch. What are some ways couples can initiate physical intimacy without it ending up in orgasm? Or how can you convey that that's what you want with your partner without thinking you're not interested in sex? Sorry about that.
Um, I mean, it's first of all, it's a lot easier if you have a therapist guiding that because then you have this kind of third that's you're paying them and the therapist is like, okay, there's a no sex rule and this week it's about creating pleasure through um, not using any genitalia, like being fully clothed, and you can do a back rub. And you do that to her this week. And then next week you do that to, if it's a heterosexual couple, you do that to him this next week. And then the next, you can progress. But I think being able to just communicate beforehand of like, hey, you know what, like I want to experiment. Would this be something you're interested in? Of like, let's just make out, and I really want the opportunity for us to make out without it going any further than that.
Mhm.
And just so we can fully be in the moment. And, we used to just make out all the time and now we don't. And I just want to do that without having the pressure of it leading to something else, that we just stay with that. I think communicating that, or, hey, I have an idea. How about we have, I want a time where it's just about creating pleasure for one another without, but we can't orgasm. Or,
Mhm.
like set it up as a game and, and your partner might be like, well, why would we do that? That sounds silly. But it can be used as one of just like it being in the experience. Two, it could be a really great form of foreplay of, hey, we're gonna be super excited and we're gonna hold off, and maybe we'll do that again, and then we'll hold off, and then eventually when you decide like, okay, orgasm is on the table now, um it's that much, it's kind of like the beginning of a relationship where it's exciting, and
Mhm.
it's like you're you're really excited for that. It kind of takes the roteness out of it.
Yeah, I like that too. You guys in the chat too, I'll get to some of your questions as well. Don't worry, hang on. Some of them I'm not sure if they're actual questions or just rhetorical questions. So we'll see here. There's one. How about having sex with someone's husband, knowing they are married, but not caring that they're married? I mean, that sounds like a whole nother show as well.
That's it, like
It's like
affairs.
betrayal.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say someone has an arranged marriage with a partner, but they don't have any sexual chemistry or with them. How would they go about improving or creating sexual chemistry? Because arranged marriages are still a thing,
Oh yeah. And
right?
they can work very, very well.
So I've heard. Yes.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think having a conversation about, well, what defines that for each person, and is it missing for both people? Um, and it. I think again, communicating is going to be your first line of defense in terms of where to go. It could be that you guys could cultivate something together. Once you know what one another wants, maybe somebody's like, gosh, I really get attracted to you. I've had those times when I have like what I call an intellectual orgasm, when we have, really great conversations. And so can we have more of that? Or, hey, I really, when you wear a certain thing, or when you shave, or when, whatever, that helps me have more attraction to you. Um, so working together, if you're both wanting that, and hey, what can we do? Or it might just be like, hey, we're really, we do the business part of our relationship and the friendship part of our relationship really well. But there isn't this attraction piece. And then what do the two of you want to do about it? Do you want to stay together? Do you want to just forego that piece of your relationship? Do you want to open your marriage? Do you want to, you have to look at the different possibilities that could, if you want to stay together, or whether you want to go your separate ways.
Yeah, and I was thinking too what we mentioned before about sex building connection versus connection building sex. Maybe it's a function of just having it and seeing if it builds the connection, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it depends. Has it ever been there?
Mhm.
There's lots of, sometimes questions are hard to answer in their fullest form, because we don't really know all the background. And so it's like, I'm just taking one snippet and trying to answer that. But it's like, oh, well, were they ever attracted to one another? Did they ever enjoy sex with one another? Did something happen that like stopped that attraction? Is there trauma?
Right.
There's, a whole bunch of things.
Cool. Okay. Um, any unconventional methods for improving intimacy with a partner who may be feeling not so intimate as they're going through a difficult time or maybe work long hours under stress?
I'm not understanding the unconventional part.
Well, let's take that out then. How do you improve intimacy with a partner? How do you engage in or encourage intimacy when your partner maybe isn't vibing with it right now?
Uh,
Or should you if you're not vibing with it? That could be
I
a
mean, again, we have to define intimacy. Is that intercourse? Is it sex? Is it just being connected? Is it, I
Mhm.
don't know. But you could simply, maybe one exercise might be to just be either laying in bed together, looking directly at one another in one another's eyes, not talking, just staring, being with one another that way. That can create a lot of intimacy. Um, you could do that sitting as well, facing one another, and just looking at one another in close proximity, um, helps bring people into the moment. And you kind of, you begin to actually see one another. Like all the automation that that I've talked about kind of falls by the wayside, and you begin to actually see one another in present time. And that can just help perhaps remind the person that, oh, we actually do like to connect, and this feels really good, and oh, I miss you, and I see you. And sometimes that in and of itself could be either the foreplay that could happen, or uh the thing that scratches the itch, that, oh, we're connected and this feels really nice. And maybe right now we're not going to have intercourse, but we are at least connected, and this feels good.
Right. Cool. Okay. What frequency should you have sex to maintain a healthy relationship slash intimate connection?
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I know what gender of person.
you know, you don't. I think. Okay, so I'm like, should I go into this? Let me answer the question, and then we
Okay.
could go into something. So it really is dependent upon what the couple wants. You know, I mean, if one person is like, I want sex 3 times a day, and the other person is like, well, I want sex 3 times a year. Um, well, what are we going to do here? And what is sex again? And how do we find a common ground where we're both uh, okay with how we're doing this thing?
Mhm.
Maybe the person who wants it more often, um, maybe their partner is like, I'm okay with giving you oral or digital, but I don't. Or maybe, hey, why don't you masturbate while I'm laying next to you, or something. There's all sorts of ways to work with it, but there's no cookie cutter answer to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I figured there wasn't.
But I think, speaking to what I think I got from your comment was, I think, would you say that that was a male asking that question?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you, but
But
that was
what did you think?
that was me trying to be funny. But
Yeah.
yeah, probably. I mean, I think typically, you know, it's a little more simple for men, I think.
So, interestingly enough, back before women entered the workplace,
Mhm.
uh, women were uh, basically more like hypersexual.
Hornier. You can say horny.
I mean, they were wanting sex all the time. And
Interesting.
they wound up going to doctors to figure out like what they could do. And that's the doctors wound up giving them these devices to help them. And these devices were thought of as the first, basically the first vibrators.
Years. Seriously?
And
Like, how far back are we talking? Like, are we talking like the 40s, the 50s?
like, just before they were, working. And yeah, like they and,
Crazy.
probably turn of the century sort of
Okay.
things. Um, and, men couldn't couldn't keep up, really. And so they needed to have some other outlet. And then once women started entering the workforce, they began to get overwhelmed, lack of time, lack of energy, taking care. It was like the whole shebang. They were doing the whole shebang, and that's when libido dropped, and that men became, had a higher like
Hmm.
libido. And so it's just interesting. It's phenomenological, and it's fascinating to me of like, oh, the less stress, that, at least in that kind of study, the less stress that women were under, the more they wanted sex.
Wow.
The, you know so it's simply a construct now of our society that, we have this idea in a heterosexual couple that men want sex more than women.
Yeah.
That is just a construct now of the society we live in.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm not saying at all that that's always the case either.
Right. Yeah, it's not
Or
always,
even, it's
but
probably
it is the paradigm with which we are currently living under,
that's fair.
versus, prior generations lived under a different paradigm.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
think it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Do you believe in scheduled sex in a relationship or marriage for those that may be occupied throughout the day?
Yeah, I mean, this is a controversial topic. Some people are advocates of it, and some people are not.
Mhm.
Um, I think I think having a designated time, it depends. If it's not going to happen otherwise, and it's important to the two of you, then having, hey, every Saturday is our night. And it's not like we have to have intercourse then, or we have to orgasm then, but that is our time to connect, and that is our time to be together, and that is our time to, um, make love,
Mhm.
and create pleasure for one another. And I think that it's great. It's intentional. It's prioritizing one another in an otherwise really busy life that we have.
Yeah. Okay. Last one that I have that I collected. Is it important to pour into your partner's desires?
Pour into them. Yeah. Again, I just don't exactly know what that means.
I'm guessing it's to sort of cultivate and nurture your partner's desires. And again, this is not my question, so
Yeah. Yes and no. Like, kind of going back to what we talked about before is, yes, if you're open to it, and but no, if it's really something you're adverse to, that's going to create more problems. So and again, what we talked about of needs versus wants,
mhm,
um, that sometimes we just have to let go certain things that we might want or desire, and for the sake of, hey, I want to be with this person, um, and I won't get this, but I get all of this.
right. Okay, cool. Anybody else in the chat have anything, question-wise? I think I covered most of them. You guys just like to talk back and forth.
I mean, there's so much to talk about regarding sex, and it's just easier when you have, a couple that's presenting the issue versus talking about it generally, because it just goes into,
Yeah, Corey says, "I think it means it's important to tailor to your partner's wants." Yes, and we'll ignore that second part about the vacuum cleaner. That's an inside joke,
okay,
these guys.
vacuum cleaner.
So fun. I
Well,
was it's no, I was cleaning my gym a few weeks ago, and I fell onto the handle of my vacuum cleaner, like,
ow.
on my bottom, yeah, so
Mm,
that's where all the vacuum cleaner jokes come from.
got it. Yeah, I mean, I was working with a couple, and they were talking about, their animals, and how their animals really impede
Oh god, I
their.
thought you were gonna go somewhere else, Julie, I got really hurt.
No, 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 no.
Oh.
I mean, again, being a therapist, like, you have to be
Ooh.
okay with whatever comes your way too. And you have to understand, like, you have to know what your limits are in terms of, do you have judgments or places that you can't go to? Um,
Correct.
which case you're gonna have to refer out. But our
Sorry.
job as therapists need to be comfortable with almost everything.
We're talking
Um,
about dogs and cats on the bed being the
yes.
problem, getting in
Yes.
the way. Okay,
Right,
sorry.
and it was something that they really hadn't talked about before,
Hmm,
and, it was just interesting to, like, be like, "Oh, here's," we talked about thirds, and how these animals were coming between them, and their intimacy and their ability to connect, and, who knew?
yeah, interesting. And I guess kids, the same thing, right? I mean, when you have
Kids, same thing.
children, they can be a huge cock blockers, right? The kids.
Yep,
Yeah,
kids.
okay.
Kids are great, and they also
They're hard.
are challenging to relationships.
Yes, they are, even when they're older.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's another topic to talk about. Is I've actually had this conversation with a couple of people recently, of just, like, nobody really talks about, everybody talks about, like, oh, kids are great, or are you going to have kids, or, and nobody is talking about how kids affect your relationship, and
Oh,
how
they can mess
challenging
them up
it is.
big time,
Oh yeah. Oh
I mean,
yeah.
I know we don't like to say things like, people got divorced and, "Oh, it wasn't your fault," and, I mean, we're not blaming things, but kids can put a huge wrench into relationships.
I think it's one of those things where it highlights things that you could otherwise sweep under the rug.
Yeah. My little one has 0 ideas about boundaries. She'll open any door at any time. Yes. And then
Yep.
nobody talks about how expensive they are or how they will affect your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I think people say how expensive they are, but they don't really break it down.
No, don't do the math. You'd never have kids if you did that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But you figure it out, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
For sure.
there's people that have a lot less resources that do okay with lots
True.
of kids.
True. That's true.
But yes, I don't think people are talking about the effects that kids can have on a relationship.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was fun. That wasn't so bad
Oh, yeah.
or embarrassing or I didn't blush. So that was good.
I mean, I think I just want to say, like, I think a lot of times we're referencing, uh, where it just seems to go towards more heterosexual couples, but I just want to put it out there of like, hey, this is all applicable to all genders, all iterations of relationships, whether same sex or transgendered or poly, or there's lots of different iterations. I just want to say, like, hey, I don't want to uh I don't want to marginalize any
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. And I don't think any of our comments really did either. So
I just want to, yeah,
yeah.
just wanted to put it out there. So I do want to say that there is a new book out, and it's by my mentor, Stan Tatkin, In
Okay.
Each Other's Care. If you're just listening, and it just came out. I just got it yesterday, so I think it's going to be great. I've read some of it and seems pretty good. So if people are interested,
Awesome. When we I can do show notes too afterwards and we can put a link or something like that into the description.
cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Let me just check this one last comment before we leave. Children are sometimes okay. Yes, this is true. So next week, same time?
Same time.
Okay. New topic. We'll figure it out.
Yep.
Julie, thanks so much. Have a great week.
You too.
Thanks everyone in the chat. We'll see you next time.
Ciao.